My name is Josh Friedberg. I'm the CEO of USA Skateboarding. I'm really excited that you're all out here today to take part of INNOSKATE. It's been a program that we've done for the last 7 years or so, and it's been the best way to share some of what makes skateboarding special with people who might not necessarily understand skateboarding or skateboarding culture. So we're going to get right into our second panel today. It's called Skating Spaces, Skateboarding and the Evolving Conceptions of Public Space. Skateboarding exists in the world in many different ways, and we have a panel of really amazing people who can talk about it from their perspectives. So our moderator today is Iain Borden. He is a professor of architecture and urban culture at UCL. I remembered it this time. That was perfect. Stuart Maclure from Long Live South Bank, instrumental in protecting South Bank from development and the continued, yes, amazing. This is the first time that I know of skateboarders being able to band together to protect a historic skate spot in the world. So Stu and his crew at LLSB deserve amazing amounts of credit. So thank you for that. Alexis Sablone, a professional skateboarder and a member of the USA national team right now. Here in town, she's generously donating some of her time before she has to go skate. So we really appreciate you being here, Alexis. Alexis also just happens to have a master's degree in architecture from MIT, so she has a little bit more to talk about besides just skateboarding. It's cool. And on the end, we have Miki Vuckovich. He's the executive director of the Tony Hawk Foundation, and he has been working to get skate parks built in the United States for 9 years? 15 years now. Amazing work they've done there. So I'm going to get out of the way. Iain's going to take it away. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. Onwards we go.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, guys, for being here. Bit of microphone shuffling going on. For those of you who just heard the amazing panel just before with Paul and Ryan talking about the technology of the skateboard, I guess the thing I wanted to start with was just that other really simple technology that skateboarding uses, which is the terrain underfoot. And on one level, we don't need very complicated terrains. We don't need very complicated architectures to skate. I'm sure we'll get into talking about what makes a great skate park. But I wondered if I could just ask you first, for each of you, about what it means just to skate on flat, and the importance of flat terrain or very simple terrains, and how that is important for skateboarding. Stu, you perhaps you could start with that. I mean, obviously the South Bank, the Undercroft where you are, there are some famous banks and some other obstacles, but a lot of it's just flat. Could you say something about that and the meaning and the connection that people have with that historic terrain?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we don't need much to be able to skate. Like, in front of us is a really good example of, we can do a lot with just flat ground. And personally, I don't like skating just flat ground that much. I like skating tranny, and I like skating, I don't know, things. Theo, on the other hand, wherever he is, best flat ground skater about. Anyway, what's important is having a space that's secure, safe, and welcoming, inviting. I think yesterday we touched on it at the panel that all we need is the kind of permission to be able to be there, and then naturally communities will form around that space. Flat ground as well. I mean, hill bombing is one of my favorite things. I'm not skating anything when I'm bombing hills, but that is one of the funnest, most enjoyable.
So straight away there you've got two very, very simple things. One is, if you're hill bombing, a slope, something that gets you go fast. And then the other thing you say is something that just gives you permission, just gives you access to a space, something that doesn't stop you from doing it. Yeah. Neither of those are particularly big, technological, difficult, or should be quite difficult things.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, like everything, there's vastly different areas of skateboarding. There's hugely technical concrete design, there's wooden mini ramps, and then there's flat ground, and I think that is the most simple and visible part of skateboarding.
Yeah. So, Alexis, maybe we could just come to it from you as a really a professional and really experienced street skater. How much is flat, or should we say simple terrains important to you? Everyday terrains, things that aren't necessarily intended and designed for skateboarding?
Well, for me, that's always been, I grew up skating, the East Coast with winters, and we had a one-car garage, and that was probably almost every flip trick I learned was on flat ground in a garage, like pushing back and forth.
So a really small space.
Very
really
small space, yeah.
We're talking
and sometimes
3
we'd
meters
put,
by 5 meters,
my driveway was stones, so we'd put like a ledge out and a piece of wood to land, or just, in the beginning, I think that was all I was looking for, is like, where was the smoothest ground with a light so I could skate at night and no one else could, So, I think it's different for everyone. I think more and more, maybe now with skate parks everywhere, I guess if you're starting to skate, maybe you think, well, that's the place to do it. But back then that wasn't, there wasn't a skate park for, over an hour.
But I guess for a lot of people, where they first start to skate is very often the bit of sidewalk outside their house.
Yeah.
For me, it was a friend's driveway, and we just used to lean a bit of wood up against a low wall. Okay, we made it not flat, but it was immediately accessible, and it was welcoming. We had permission to skate there. You had permission to skate in your family garage.
And I think that there's just a certain, you can skate however you want, and you can do whatever you want with a skateboard, but I think that there's this inherent, you're not going to try to learn a tray flip before you learn a kick flip. Like, there's a natural way you try to progress, or each person, and because it builds on itself. And I think that you want to start, at least, I won't try something like off a ramp or downstairs or something if I can't do it on flat ground. I think some people are like, oh, I'll just learn it down the stairs, but it's like that's where you start.
So flat ground for you is a kind of training ground to take somewhere else?
And it's my favorite thing to skate still. So, I guess it's different than you, but that's probably why I'm pretty terrible at transition and I avoid it. But, I think it has a lot to do with where you grow up and what's around you. But for me, that was like the foundation of...
So, Miki, how's it for you? How does flat ground or simple terrain figure for you? I guess you and I are slightly older than these guys, and skate parks may have figured. For me, they figured. I grew up, first started skating in the late 70s, so skate parks were the big thing for me. You're a bit younger than me. But so where does flat and simple terrain figure in your experience?
Well, not much younger, but the beautiful thing about skateboarding is it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be, right? And depending on what you have available to you, you can, if you have flat ground, you adapt to that. If you have more complex skate park terrain, for example, you can adapt to that. But for me, and I think for skaters of a certain age, the essence of skateboarding is turning. As Paul just described the evolution of the skateboard in the last panel, the skateboard is a fixed deck and then 2 pivot turning devices and 4 wheels. So the actual skateboard is designed to turn. And so for me, the flat ground just invites the ability to just use the skateboard as it was originally invented, which is to turn and to use it, use the device and sort of test it to what limits it might have. And that's for me what flat ground skating is. It's, I don't know, let's call it slalom, but it's just rolling and cruising and pumping and, olling maybe. So it's using the skateboard as initially intended.
So we have a simple technology, the skateboard. We have a fairly simple possible of terrain. It can be purely flat. It maybe can be transition or starting to go into banks. So one of the things then that is obviously notable about skateboarding particularly in the 80s and into the 90s is it starts to really respond to the flat ground, but also to ledges and to planters and to other obstacles in the terrain. And I think it raises the question of how much should we just accept the architecture that's already provided in the cities for skateboarding, and how much do we want to go out and deliberately provide things that are good to skate? What's the virtue of adding things in? And I guess, Stu, that must be something that you faced at the Undercroft, which is a found space, but was also being modulated a little bit with extra objects, the odd quarter pipe and so on. How much do we want the terrains of skateboarding to be purely natural, and how much do we try and build something, design something and add something to it? Maybe you could say something about how you guys have dealt with that at the Undercroft.
Yeah, I mean, you need to let things organically evolve over time. So at South Bank, it was built in 1967. There was nothing built on top of that for years afterwards, and then every decade almost there's a ledge put in. So these things don't happen quickly, and we've been really conscious of not adding too much stuff to the new space. It's funny, after years and years of work just building a project which is essentially flat ground and one tiny bank, and then people always ask us, well, what are you putting in there? Or companies have offered to pay for obstacles to get put in there. We've said no, because we want people need to learn the lines, people need to kind of see how that space is able to be skated best, and I think in years to come things will gradually get put there.
So that's something that's very specific, I guess, to the Undercroft, because it's such a famous found space already. But I guess you've been involved in other spaces as well. You're involved in the Marshgate Terrace, just on the other side of the copper box. And that, I guess, is going to be different. There's going to be lots of other new obstacles and things put in there. How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, I mean, on that note, if anyone is interested in that project, please do speak to myself or Daryl over there. We're looking for people to get involved and help kind of tell us what we want there. But that was a really interesting project, because it was actually the Mayor of London sports team that approached us to kind of give them advice about how best to spend funding now that the Olympics include skateboarding. So that's been a really positive relationship with the Mayor's office, and it's a pilot project, so it's an interim use similar to Frontside Gardens was. Yeah. And it's rad to just be able to use basically a lot of the stuff that they've thrown away in there is right over there in the kind of, I know they call it the boneyard, but yeah, and that's 3 years. We can just kind of put modular things about, and they've just letting us do it. And it ticks boxes for them. We're reusing materials that would have otherwise been thrown away, and they can activate the space, and they've programmed like 30 weeks of skate lessons, and Skate Pal will be doing their refugee skate schools there. So that's an example of a space that is a disused access road, flat ground, and we've been given the opportunity to make it more exciting. And I think it's going to be really good. Hopefully it should be open in a few months.
Yeah, in a few months that'll be open. Fantastic, that's great. So Alexis, you obviously you're a street skater, so you skate the street, but you've also been involved in designing things. I know you do art exhibitions, you've done exhibitions, but I guess most recently you've done the skateboardable sculpture in Malmo. Could you say something about how you approach it from a design perspective as well? When you did the thing in Malmo, perhaps you could describe it to people as well.
So I was invited to design a skatable sculpture in a public square in Malmo, and that for me was, as a designer and skater, a really exciting opportunity. And to me, like, somewhere, or at least the way I thought of it, somewhere between a skate park and street skating, which is to say that, I mean, I like the idea that it's part of a public space, so it's not a fenced-off area or something that's just meant for skaters. It could be a space shared by the public and skateboarders. That being said, it was something intended for skateboarding, at least partially, and built for that purpose. So as a street skater, there's part of me that's like, I mean, I love skating skate parks. I love skating a lot of things, whether it's fun is not, it's all fun. But I think that the two exist kind of in parallel, or skating a skate park, in my mind, is very different than street skating, and one doesn't replace the other. I mean, it's like incredible how many more places there are built for skating now than when I first started. But I don't know. To me, like skating something that wasn't intended for skating is like part of. That's what skateboarding is, you know. Like that's sort of an inherent act of like, you know, you find something and you're innovating. This thing wasn't built for you, and you're coming up with ways that you're going to do something with it, and that's so.
So when you're designing something, a skateboardable sculpture, does that mean you try and make it difficult to skate, as if it wasn't intended? So it's designed as if it was not designed to be skated. Does that make sense? Do you make it eccentric and difficult and awkward?
You know, I was trying to find the right balance. Honestly, like, I think that was something I was kind of struggling with, and something, you know, I'm working on a next project now, and it's like finding the right. I wanted something that was interesting and that I thought would make the dream is to make a place. I don't want to say iconic, but something that stands out as like something unique, and you know, there's certain parameters to work within, and you want something that's just fun. I mean, basically fun. And there was enough in that site, because it happened to be like 3 stairs set up in a raised square. So already with stairs, there's something else to skate that's not easy, but there's like something there to start with. So I mean, I wanted something. I mean, I think it's rare that you see. I mean, when you're younger, there are playgrounds, and there are these things that are open for interpretation for young children to like, play with that. Yeah. And as you get older, it's more and more like, this is a bench, this is for sitting, this is a path, this is for walking. So what intrigues me, I guess, is something that's less prescribed. So, I mean, a skateboarder sees it and immediately thinks like, oh, I want to see what that feels like to skate that, and they'll figure it out. You know, skateboarding's the best spots, in my mind, have been spots that weren't even created for skating. So basically you can make almost anything, and within, you know, except for like water, and skaters will figure out an interesting way to skate it. So I guess I'm interested in stuff that's, I don't know, maybe even non-skateboarders see it and are kind of like, how do I interact with that? I don't know, like, I mean, maybe they sit on it and then skaters are like, can you get out of the way? But I think that's interesting. Yeah. So I don't know. It's something I'm still, it's a process of figuring out what that is, because for me as a designer, I want to do more and more things like that. But I don't know what the perfect balance is. Yeah. It's kind of. Yeah.
So, Miki, for your organisation, I guess you've probably been involved in more skate parks than any other organisation in the world.
560 to date.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's incredible. And how have you seen the sort of, I guess I'm thinking about design, but also the attitudes of the people who are organising some of those skate parks there, how they see the skate park in relation to the rest of the city? Are their thoughts been changing on that over the years? How's that been playing out?
Yeah, so when we started our work in 2002, there was a lot of emphasis and a lot of effort put into helping local organizations and youth skaters in different communities make the case for skateboarding and make the case for skate parks to their local leaders. And one of the things we've seen change drastically in the last certainly 5 or 10 years is that shift in attitude, where there's no longer the need to make the case for a skate park. It's simply local leaders want to know how to do it. And so our emphasis is in helping the communities organize, articulate their vision, and ensure that the youth and the skaters are involved from the beginning of the project, and putting work in all the way through, and certainly having input on the design. Yeah. And that professional designers and professional builders are involved who can take the input from the skaters themselves, match that with a designer's experience in what works, what doesn't work, and how to organize those elements, and come up with something really unique for that community.
And that's always different. Every skate park is different in that respect. They're not the same.
Yeah. I think a useful analogy is to look at the golf courses. Golf courses all have certain things. They have 18 holes. They have fairways and greens and sand traps, etc. but every one is unique, and it depends on the topography, depends on the designer, who often are pro golfers or former pro golfers. And skate parks are similar, where there's a budget, which is a limiter. There's the location, the terrain, the topography, and so the designers work within those constraints and then take the input from the kids. And you'll see a lot of the same elements: stairs, rails, benches, bowls. But ideally, they're all done in each park is unique, which gives that skate park a different gives the user a different experience. And it also then encourages skaters to move around and visit different parks, and then they end up meeting other skaters, and you have this really great interaction and sort of expansion of experience.
So, I mean, I love skate parks. I skate transition. I don't skate street. I've always loved skating skate parks. I'm a huge fan of skate parks. They're more than a sports facility. They're social hubs. They're community hubs. They help with outreach. They're amazing things. But one of the dangers is that, particularly if they're built in a particular part of town or in a city, that some of the people who are behind the skate park will see it as a replacement for skateboarding in streets. We've built you a skate park, so now we don't want you to skate the streets. Is that a conversation that you get into with the skate parks that the Tony Hawk Foundation's involved in?
Yeah, it's usually a pretty short conversation, because whether or not a city builds a skate park, they still don't want you in the street. Like, the fact that you have a skate park doesn't suddenly make it illegal everywhere else. It's already illegal everywhere else. So our point to skaters who don't really care about having a skate park is, skateboarding has been around for decades and decades. We've been here as long as some of the other sports that cities are already providing multiple facilities for. Skaters number in the U.S., 1 in 5 kids are skating, right? Yeah. It's not a specific group. It's your kids or your kids' friends, and it's ubiquitous. And so skateboarding deserves, in every town, at least one facility, probably several. And so even if you don't want the skate park, you should fight for your right to those resources and to provide the skate park for the other skaters who do want it, because probably they'll end up skating there, and then they'll free up some of the local spots that you like to skate. So it's going to benefit you as well. But it's a matter of just, it's our time, and it's skate parks are something that communities need and the skaters deserve.
So one of the things that we've seen, I think, develop over the last few years is, yes, we've got more and more skate parks, but we're also starting to see, and I think Malmo's a prime example, and I think what you guys have achieved at the Undercroft prime example, where not all cities by any means, maybe still in a relatively rare set of examples, but some places, some cities are starting to welcome skateboarding and integrate it in some way into the urban environment, either through a spot that skaters have appropriated and it's been reconciled and has been expanded, or in Malmo, where they've got a whole series of everything from skate parks to DIY spots to skate spots to inviting people in to do skateboardable sculpture. And I guess the things, Stu, that you're doing in the Marshgate Terrace, which is a bit of meanwhile use of public space, and that seems to me to be one of the futures for skateboarding, is the idea that it's not that it's either in a skate park where it's legit or it's transgressive and illegal in the rest of the city, but maybe we can start to produce public spaces that are not designed necessarily for skateboarding, but where skateboarding isn't designed out. And I guess what's happening out here with the obstacles that Badir Bakar has designed and put here, an example of how you can do something quite simple just to modulate an urban space a little bit. And I wondered if you guys see a future for that in public spaces, that we could have these multifunctional, more inclusive spaces that aren't just for skateboarders, but are for all different kinds of public.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise that these things happen out of relationships that are fostered, and that's why Malmo's been so successful, because they've had such a close relationship with the city government, and without those relationships and transparent conversations, you're just not going to get spots built, because there needs to be an understanding that the best designers, the most passionate fundraisers are skateboarders, because we do it because we love it. We do it in our spare time because we think it's for the benefit of, the civic society, if you want to think on like a broader scale. And that's policy development is at the core of a lot of these conversations. Like, yes, we can skate anything. Yes, we can be creative on our skateboards, but we need to start having more conversations with decision makers to really affect policy and get it written into building code, get it written into local neighborhood plans. And like you were saying yesterday, Miki, about, you shouldn't have to do your work because it should be, an obligation to include these things. So, yeah, I think it will continue to blow up because there are more. I think skating relatively is fairly young and it's developing, and it's started to be a bit more respected by the powers that be, and now they're interested in it and they can kind of see the value of it quite clearly. And we just need to keep on having those conversations, make sure that we're sending emails, turning up to meetings, because without that, then there's no development.
So does that... So skateboarding has always thought of itself as very independent, very grassroots, often done by, practiced by people who are eccentric or somehow not on the outside of society, but in some way value their independence. Does this behold skateboarding to have or need to have organisations and groups? No. So how do people have the conversation with skaters? If you're a city authority, how do you have that conversation, or how do those conversations take place? If the skaters want to build up a policy like Malmo has done, how do the skaters do that?
It's so simple. It's just you go to the skate spot and you chat to people.
Yeah.
It really is that simple. It pisses me off so much when people think it's so complicated. It's not. You just chat to people. It's just a conversation is the start. Have one conversation, write down your phone number, have another conversation. Within 2 years, you're probably going to be better mates than you were without that first conversation.
Yeah.
And you're both going to have a vested interest in whatever the project is that you're chatting about. So to sit behind laptops and write emails, great if you're a keyboard warrior, but you just need to get out in the streets, go for a session, accept an invitation to go to the bar. Not always, but you just say yes to things, to conversations, and just chat to people. It's not difficult.
Yeah. So it's back in a way to that importance of terrain, of being there and being present and talking to the users and talking to the riders and talking to the people who are actually there on the ground, on the spot in the city.
Yeah. It can get difficult. I'm not saying it's easy by any means, but it's easy to start that process.
Oh. Miki, did you want to come in on that?
I just want to point out to your point at South Bank. You were saying that every weekend you guys have a table set up out front where the skaters have gone outside of the fence line and set up a table to interact with the public that are walking by. So not only are they communicating with the skaters, they're interacting and reaching out to the public who are walking by the thousands every week and sharing the story with them and really educating people who aren't skaters to appreciate what it is they're seeing and maybe understand it better.
Okay, that's really interesting. So that raises something else that I wanted to turn to, which is the thing that, we talk a lot about skateboarding and the benefits that it has for skateboarders. And there's a whole obvious things that we know about. It fosters independence and a sense of participation and not being afraid to fail and a sense of robustness, and there's entrepreneurialism and creativity, etc., etc. But it also raises the question of what does skateboarding give to cities that's good for people who are not skaters? Because I think one of the things that was amazing about the Long Live South Bank campaign is you guys got 150,000 people, something like that, to sign a petition, way over 100,000 people. And on one level, they were, why were they supporting, what did people see as the value of skateboarding in cities for them, even if they didn't necessarily get on a board?
Well, I think part of the reason that we were able to garner that support is how central it is in London and how many people walk past the table. But it's easy to recognise when people are having fun. It's easy to recognise when people have authentic, positive relationships. You can be walking along with your earphones in, bummed that you've got to go to work the next day, and then you look and you see a 15-year-old, a 25-year-old, and like a 35-year-old all like having a laugh together, like over trying to learn how to do a front shove. Like and I think people recognize that emotion. Like you see the tiniest, ripple of a smile in somebody's face, and that emits to you a positive emotion, and people value that. And I think having space to let that grow is a beautiful thing, and the members of the public just love that, because why wouldn't you?
Alexis?
Yeah, I mean, I just hearing you talk about that, it's important to have these conversations, and how, I mean, I think that the difference between seeing something and writing it off as vandalism or something that you don't understand, and then seeing it as something that, I think the terms I've heard a lot in Malmo is they see it as something that like activates these spaces that might otherwise be dead or less alive. And I think that's something that skateboarding automatically brings to a space. It's like not that, the regular members of the public aren't always going to spend 5 hours, 6 hours in this space, like using it and enjoying it and using and having fun, like you said. And I think that that's something that's not just unique to skateboard. You see people use public space in all kinds of ways, but seeing that and taking the second to realize that it's not just trying to like ruin the edge of a ledge, and with skateboarding it doesn't mean drugs or vandalism or all these other things. It's actually a positive thing, or can be seen as a positive thing. I think it's been dismissed in the past, or for so long, as one thing, and I guess the optimistic side of me, like with all of the changes that are happening in skateboarding, is that people change their minds about that, instead of thinking that it only belongs, it's one thing. They see it as it's part of the city. It's always been part of the city. It's something positive, not everybody is maybe going to see it that way, but I think that it's probably an important time to be doing as much as you can to try to convince people of that, before it's seen as just something that belongs in arenas.
Yeah. I think this is where skateboarding starts to speak about actually some really quite profound questions about what our cities are and who are they for. We're used to thinking about our cities in functional ways, about what, the bus is going to run on time, am I going to get to work and back okay, is the water going to come out of the tap when I want to run a bath or have a shower, is it safe? These things are really, I've got somewhere to live. These are really important things. But also there's a sense of cities of being places that are surprising and creative, and places full of pleasure, and things that are full of culture. And it seems to me that what skateboarding does is it reasserts that idea of city spaces are places that are, yes, of political rights for people of all ages, backgrounds, identities, ethnicities, whatever, to come into. But they also, what skateboarding does is remind everybody that we should be able to have fun and pleasure and enjoyment in city spaces, and we shouldn't necessarily have to do that by buying something. It shouldn't be about buying a mocha frappuccino, how much a mocha frappuccino might be. And skateboards, okay, they're not free, but they're relatively cheap things. Paul, so his titanium 3D printed trucks aside, but it's an accessible thing. Most people can engage in skateboarding, and it brings pleasure and enjoyment to the city. And it's not a shop, and it's not an office, and it's not a transport device that you have to pay large sums of money to use to. So it's a different kind of city. So this right here, right now, is very different to the kind of space that here east might be during the week. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but it seems to me you need both. And we need our cities to be full of pleasure as well of work, and movement as well as shopping. And skateboarding is one way, not the only way, that can happen.
I think that skateboarding is sort of a cultural canary in the coal mine. A city, an urban area with a vibrant skate scene suggests that there's a vibrant culture and arts and creative, culture in that town. a city with an overly patrolled, street where skateboarding isn't visible, I think it's an indication that there's maybe other things going wrong there too. So,
Yeah, that's a great idea. People who want, there are companies that do this. If they want to work out the economic vibrancy of a city, they go into it and they count the cranes, they count the construction cranes, and the more you can see, that's an indication of the economic vitality. So I think the
certainly
idea you could
suggests
go
that it's
and
a more
count,
skatable city.
yeah. If you could go and count the skaters, that's a brilliant idea that you could measure the creativity of a city by the presence of skaters. We're going to wrap up pretty soon. I think one last thing, I actually want to turn back to this idea of skate parks. And some of Miki, maybe you could say something about some of the values of skate parks not just to the skaters. So I think we've seen skate parks being used to bring in tourists or to bring in visitors. They've helped to regenerate an area. Could you say something about that and those kinds of dimensions of skate parks?
Yeah, like the work we do focuses on skate parks as a local community asset, something for the local skaters. But clearly, as we talked about with skate park design, a good skate park is going to attract people from other places. A number of towns have maybe overbuilt their skate parks a little bit, understanding that visitors to their town, if they're a tourist destination, are going to use the skate park. And so most cities that are putting a lot into their skate parks and putting it in a really visible space are proud of it, and they want to showcase it, and they want people to come and visit it. So it becomes almost a calling card for their town, and families visiting will bring their kids there. So what happens in the skate park is often very important for those local leaders, and they invest a lot in it, and they take care to ensure that all the conditions are proper, and that's certainly the work that we focus on doing with them, is to tick all those boxes. But the skate parks ideally are for everybody. They're generally, the skaters are pushing for them, but one of the things we've been careful to do is ensure that the parks that we work on are open to all wheels, and that includes inline and scooters and bikes and wheelchairs for sure. And in California, for example, we helped a local assemblyman recently pass a law that added wheelchairs and bikes and scooters to the state liability law that gives the city's protection to build skate parks and then open them up now to all wheels, basically. And so we really want to see everybody in the skate park. And even, if the park is done right, it's going to attract not just the skaters, but their friends who don't skate, and perhaps others to come and see what's going on there. Just as the South Bank has become an attraction along the riverfront there for people to come by, stop, and watch and be entertained. I mean, it's amazing, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out SLS today and see what's going on. I mean, it's fantastic, and it's something that people should enjoy, even if they're not on the board.
Yeah. And Alexis, as a pro skater, I guess but it's not just pro skaters, will visit places because of specific skate spots, because of specific skate parks. Yeah. It makes you travel. It makes you go different places. Mm-hmm. Has that been an important part of skateboarding for you, the moving around and seeing different places?
Yeah, I mean, I've, been fortunate enough I've traveled all over the world to, skate a ledge in Morocco, or it's pretty crazy when you think about it. And it's also pretty interesting to, the kind of knowledge a skateboarder has. Just any skateboarder, if you show them a spot, they say, oh, that's in China. Even places they haven't been, they could tell you tricks somebody has done somewhere, and it's really just, to your average person, it's a walkway, or it's some nondescript place, and those places hold a lot of importance, in the skate world. Those places are iconic, or they represent like an era of skateboarding, like Love Park or different. It's countless, but South Bank. So I think, it's been a huge part of my life, and I think that we're talking about. I think having skate parks everywhere and these inclusive, safe places for people of all ages to do things is incredible and necessary. And then also what you were saying though about the ways that especially the youth can engage with their city. There are, when you think about the act of skateboarding, the amount of the creativity and discipline and like all the things that go into it, and that it's a way for young people to use the city and to be a part of it. I think in our previous to be a member of society, kind of, that's, I think that what might be misinterpreted as something destructive is actually so much more, really, when it's like what other opportunities are, rather than, it's not something you don't have to be driven there, you don't have to buy anything, you have, if you can be in the city with your friends and be like using the city in some kind of creative way, I think that's really unique to skateboarding. Of course, I think that because I'm a skateboarder, but I think that shouldn't be overlooked. I think that's really critical.
Okay, I think that's a great place to finish. Thanks very much. Thanks to Miki, thanks to Alexis, thanks to Stu. Thanks all for listening. Thank you. Cheers.